Welcome to the lectures. So today we are covering on this topic related to completion. I have already on Tuesday to ask you to follow me on this practical completion. Okay, so the clause that we are covering is 15.1 to 15.4. So please understand the function of the various clause, who to operate it. So the 15.1a and 1b is for the architect to use. 15.2 is for the contractor to use, to apply. And then it is for the architect to use 15.2a or 15.2b to grant the certificate of completion. If it's not, then the architect will give their reasons. So next we have your 15.3. 15.3 is related to the certificate completion where there is a list of defects attached to the CPC. Okay, so that list of defects attached to CPC, if the contractor didn't carry out the defects remedial work within the certain time frame, then these are the options available for the employer to the contractor. Grant the contractor additional time, ask a third party to do it and charge out to contractor, or number 3, 15.3c, ask the QS or the architect to work up the defects and then to see the cost reduction and leave it as it is. So these are the 3 clauses, how it operates. And then we have to look into your 15.4. 15.4 is a very special one. It's a defect list that is generated before the expiry of the defects liability period. So this is, I call it the last list. The earlier one is the first list. And now, today we are going to cover clause 15.5. This is the recurring list. Recurring list because during the defects liability period, as stated in the appendix, so the defects liability period, you will be stated in the appendix. How long is going to be? It can be 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, and so on. Okay, so these are the duration that is listed in the appendix. See here, if none stated, it will be 12 months. Okay, that is your clause 15.4 for your defects liability period. So that the 15.4 is triggered. So this is a list upon completion. The CMGD certificate will be issued theoretically. Okay, so as usual, if the contractor failed to complete, then the option available for the employer will be as equivalent to here again. Clause 13, 15.3, A, B, or C. Okay, so give the contractor more time or engage other person to charge to the contractor or leave it and then set off under clause 30.4. So this clause 15.3 is a very useful tool for the employer in the event that the contractor failed to rectify the defects identified by the consultants. In this case, architect. Architect will send with a covering letter to the contractor, please rectify all these defects within a certain time frame. Okay. So now we go on to your clause 15.6. We are covering more on the defects in the next topic or so. Okay, because there are few categories of the defects. Understand them, and then when the certificate can be issued on certain type of defects occurring, it won't be issued. We are covering that in the next section. So if the defects are all completed already, under clause 15.4, I mentioned to you this 15.4 is the last list. Okay, so the contractor will immediately give a written notice to the architect, and then the architect, as usual, will do the final checking. So within 14 days of receiving the contractor's letter or notice, then the architect will have to carry out the following. So under the 15.6a, if the opinion of the architect there is no defects or already all made good, then the CMGD will be issued. So this is how to end the defects liability period. Without the CMGD, the defects liability is still running. Alternatively, if the architect use 15.6b, then the defects not made good yet. And then the architect will give a written notice to the contractor stating that it is not completed, so CMGD won't be issued. So this is how this so-called clause are operating, at which time frame and so on. Then we look into the responsibility or obligation of the contractor. So generally, if you look at it, the obligation of the contractor is all the time spelled out in the clause 21.1 on the commencement of the work. See, clause 21.1 is about the commencement of the work. So contractor must complete the work on or before the completion date. So you can see here under this appendix, will tell you already. So you can see the importance of appendix every time I come back to here, because these are all the critical dates, money, time, and everything are all here. Okay, so if this is a single phase contract, the completion date is stated here, and then here you have your completion date type here. So if this date is already expired and you are going to expire, then if there is no extension of time, it means the project is delayed. Okay, so this completion date ties back to CPC. If you can finish earlier, then the CPC will be issued earlier. It doesn't mean that the CPC will only start from the end of this date. No, it can be earlier. But if you delay, then the CPC will be issued later, or with valid extension of time, the completion date will be extended. So this is how it operates. So you can do it on or before. If you before, that means you have a earlier completion. Okay, so the obligation of the contractor is to complete on or before. If there is extended valid extension of time, then the date will be lengthened. And then you must finish the whole of the work to ensure that you comply with the specifications and any other requirement upon the testing and so on. So there are defects that need to be complied. within the time frame. So you have your initial list, you have the subsequent list, and so on. So 15.1a is the initial list. Then you have your last list as 15.4. So these are the lists, that is the starting and the ending. But in between, the clause 15.5 is operating. That is your recurring list. Because at any time, the defects occur in that project, whether it's residential, commercial, or infrastructure projects, the contract administrator, in this case, for this project, it will be architect, small towards building, will have the power to issue the recurring defect list to the contractor, and the contractor have to rectify within a certain time frame. If you don't get it done, then the clause 15.3 ABC will be operational. I hope you understand the clause 15 ABC. A, to give you more time. B, engage other parties to get it done and charge it to you. And C, okay, leave it as it is. And then the cost reduction will be introduced by the architect or the QS on behalf of the employer. So generally the rule is this: contractor need to rectify the defects within a certain time frame. So these are the time frame for the architect to notify the contractor, and then the contractor got the time around this time to rectify the defects. So this is related to clause the last list, this one, but the principle is still the same to apply for the recurring list. Okay, so please understand the principle of defects. You got the first list, you got the last list, and then you got the recurring list, which clause to use. Okay, you don't simply quote the clause and then it will be very embarrassing that you are using the wrong clause to send it out to the contractor. So this is what I mean by the recurring list. Under the clause 15.5, okay? So notwithstanding clause 15.4, this is the last list. This is the last list, okay? So architect at any time can issue by using AI, okay, to the contractor to rectify the defects. It must be an AI. You cannot just orally. It have to be an architect's instruction. Okay. So there are a few types of defects. Number one, it could be a urgent rectification. So usually urgent rectification, you need to get it done as quickly as possible. No more 28 days to wait already. Within the 28 days, no more. The urgent rectification, for example, the pipes are leaking. The pipes are clogged up and so on, that are related to something critical that the end user must ensure that the end user's comfort are taken into consideration. So more often than that, the urgent rectification have to do it ASAP. This is the ASAP category. Okay, so there's another rectification that we are going to cover will be within the 28 days. So these are two categories. There's another category that the defects is not the responsibility of the contractor. That one you don't have to rectify. So you have to check, as a contractor, we need to check whether it's under the urgent, normal, or outside your responsibility and liability. So don't simply go and remediate everything if you are working for contractor. Okay. So as usual, These are the rights that given to the employer in case that the contractor then rectify the defects. So this is all the time I'm talking about is your clause 15, 1, A, B, and C. So sorry, 15.3 A, B, and C. This is the clause that we are talking. So this clause is a very useful one, 15.3 A, B, and C. Okay, so this clause is operational at any time in the event that the contractor didn't get the remedial work done timely. So upon the full completion, under the clause 15.4, that is the last lease, then the CMGD will be issued. I hope you understand the operation of the various clause and the implication to the contractor and also to the employer. The architect is the party that do all the administrative work on behalf of the employer. Okay, so more often than not, the architect will make use of the site people, the clerk of work, resident architect, and resident engineers to assist in compiling all the defects. Or sometimes, especially on residential building, the end user will come up with a list to inform the clerk of work on the defects in the units within the DLP duration. And then the clerk of work will compile this and bring it to the architect. And the architect check through if they are valid defects, so they will send it to the contractor. But sometimes within the defect list, the items are not so valid. So we will go back to that one afterwards. Okay, so what is the meaning of completion? So these are important so-called understanding, so that will be less argument with the contractor. As I say, it's a very subjective area, because under your PAM 2018, same case for TAM 2006, the determination of completion is at the discretion of the architect. So completion means all the works for the intended purpose expressly stated in the contract. So this is who to determine this item. It is the architect and not the employer. So how to really interpret correctly for their intended purposes is a good area for dispute. So if it's ready under this state, then it can be issued the certificate of practical completion. But please take note, these are the items that can still happen and the CPC can be issued. Latent defects. This item nobody can see. Okay, so this one upon is happening, then the contractor need to rectify. If not, nobody can see. So there is no such thing that the architect can use this ground to not to issue the certificate of practical completion. So the other one is patent defects. Guarantee you will never get your certificate of practical completion. Patent defects means some major defects. So once this has been identified, a patent defect, you will never get your certificate of practical completion. You must tidy up your patent defects, then there will be a next checking. After that, then the certificate can be issued. So as usual, all construction work need to be done. These are the requirements for the contractor to achieve practical completion. So minor works incomplete, possible, is up to the architect. If they think that the minor work is still considered as incomplete, then you will never get that certificate. So this is an area I did mention to you. The determination is at the whims and fancies of the architect. To some of them, they may give you the CPC even though there are hundreds items of minor defects. To some of them, the architect may not give you the CPC even you have 20 minor defects. So all very, very subjective. Okay. So then what is the effect of CPC? So please understand this principle. Why CPC is so important to the contractor? The certificate of practical completion. Why so important to the contractor? You can see the various grounds here. So because it have a very serious impact upon the contractor's obligations and also finance or their cash flow. Okay, so once the CPC issued, as a consultant, as an employer, as a contractor or subcontractors, you need to pay attention the importance of this CPC. Okay, so the date of the CPC is the commencement of a lot of things. Okay, so now point number one. Once CPC issued, it means the construction phase of the contract is already comply. Okay, so then the beginning of the handover and the maintenance stage. So end of construction phase, but then the commencement of the handover and maintenance stage. So this handover and maintenance stage, there are a lot of documents to be carried out by the contractor and subcontractors and suppliers, especially on the menus, drawings, and so on. So this is the administrative part. Okay, and then more towards the contractual aspect of it. The moment the CPC is issued, the possession of site completely comes to an end. It means on that day, the contractor is no more the contractual license of the project. The contractual license of the contractor come to a very end on the date of practical completion. So at any time the contractor entered the project to do maintenance or whatever, if the contractor or the subcontractors or suppliers, whatever, want to enter the site, then you must get permission from the owner. If not, the party that is entering it will becomes a trespasser. So these are the important legal implication on the importance of the CPC. Okay, so this is the contractual aspect, but in practice, the contractor will be walking in and out to do the repair work. So please be careful. In future, if you want to manage the project properly, you have to let the contractor know your license is already extinguished. At any time you want to come in, you may have get a authorization letter from the employer or from the consultants, where the employer have delegated such power to issue such letter to get the things done. If not, it is not proper. Okay, so this is something will be happening at the project site where a lot of people don't even bother, but as long as there's no problem, it is okay. If there's problem, then finger pointing will come out already. So please remember then the so-called authority or the rights to enter the site, because it got a lot of implication over your insurance, a lot of your other entitlement at the project site. So next, after the CPC, it means that the care, protection, and security of the works comes to an end. It means that the contractor insurance for the work is already completed. And also the security to be provided by the contractor comes to an end. This will be taken over to the employer. If you are the consultant, you better brief the employer that you need to take up the insurance for the completed project already. And then to have their people to man the security for the completed structure or building. No more the contractor's responsibility. See, even though contractor have to do the remedial work, a separate matter. Care, protection, and security goes back to the owner. So please be careful. It's not to the architect, it's to the owner. And if you are a consultant for the project, working with the architect, so this is something that you need to remember to inform the employer. If anything goes wrong after that date on that completed building, it is the employer's responsibility. Okay, if this structure is already handed to the end user, then the end user or the employer had to protect themselves. Like completed residential building, they have to buy the fire insurance and the content insurance and so on. So same case for completed building, the employer may have to buy the fire insurance, the so-called the content of the building or the structure. What you may have computer inside, you may have your office equipment inside and so on. That is a separate insurance coverage where the contractor cannot help you anymore. So this is another important point on the regular certification and payment. So I did mention to you on the interim payment certificate. You see here, interim payment claim. See? So this interim payment claim, as long as the construction haven't achieved CPC, repeat, as long as the project is not issued CPC, contractor got the right to claim, to submit their claim, interim claim at the interval as stated here. So if none written here is at end of each month. No CPC, contractor can submit every month. And the QS must evaluate and architect must issue interim payment certificate upon each claim by the contractor. Okay. Now, once the CPC is issued, the rights to regular certificate expire. Okay. So at the end of the CPC, it comes, it tells you the end of certificate and payment as stated under the appendix is no more applicable. Ends of the certificate payment or regular interim payment under the contract. So that means the contractor can make the claim after the CPC because a lot of tidying up of the account is ongoing. Quantity finalization, rates finalization. After that, there will be additional money to be paid. So the contractor can raise a claim. That one is no more interim payment claim. It's just a claim after the CPC. It is up to the architect to evaluate and issue the certificate to the contractor. Sometimes the contractor may submit monthly, weekly, and so on, or even few months within the defects liability period. It is up to the contractor, and also it is up to the architect to evaluate them and then to prepare the certificate of payment. I did mention to you, as long there is no certificate to pay, there is no proper mechanism to pay the contractor by the employer. So under your PEM contract, your JKR contract, your CIDB contract, your FIDIC contract, this mechanism have to be there. you need to have a certificate by the architect under PAM, and also under your FIDIC will be the superintending officer and so on. Okay, so please remember that the regular certification claim and the payment mechanism is no more monthly and so on. It's up to the discretion of the architect. Next, this is a very important part to the contractor, retention sum. Once the CPC issued, it means the contractor is entitled for 50%, one majority of the retention sum to be released. So this is the significance of CPC to the contractor. Okay, so from the date of the CPC, the contractor can raise a claim. Okay, because I mentioned to you, the certificate of practical completion issued already, the monthly claim duration is no more applicable. So contractor can immediately after the receiving the certificate of practical completion, the next day, submit a claim solely for retention sum release or retention sum release plus other works not yet finalized. Contractor got the right to submit already. If you are the consultant, you cannot block the contractor from doing so, because you cannot force the contractor. Oh, how come it's not the end of the month? Why you submit your so-called claim? No more already. I already mentioned to you. Okay. The end of the usual certification and payment duration is already not applicable. It's up to the contractor to claim. It's up to the discretion of the architects to certify and so on. Okay, so this is a very important point to the contractor and so to the consultant on how to operate this PAM clause, FIDIC clause, your JKR and CID. They are exactly the same principle. It's only the duration and all these things are differing. Okay, so now once you receive the CPC, it is only that date the DLP will commence. Okay, so the DLP will commence immediately after the date of the CPC. So this is important, so that the time duration, the duration for the DLP is computed basing on the date of the CPC. Okay, and how the date of CPC to be achieved? There is earlier I mentioned to you under your clause 15, how to determine the CPC commencement date. There are a few criteria to be complied. Okay, so it's important that certificate of practical completion to the contractor, retention sum release, defects liability commence. If not, the contractual liability on these defects is so-called open or at large. So it's very damaging to the contractor, because existing structure could be having plenty of problems and it was not looked into because this DLP is not running. Okay, so as usual, also the defects liability period, it means that the commencement of the maintenance, okay, period by the contractor. Okay, so this is another important part to the QS. The CPC is the date where the period of final measurement. Please differentiate between final measurement and final account. Okay, so this one is the final measurement. All the paperwork in relation to the quantity aspect need to be tidy up already. How long to tidy up? The period of final measurement. You look at the clause there on the final measurement and final payment and so on. Okay, so generally the period of final measurement is 6 months after the CPC. Okay, So you look at your clause 15. That is on your completion. Oh, clause 30. Now your clause 30, sorry. Yeah. See here? So it ties back earlier did I mention over the certificate of project completion and the retention sum is also under your clause 30. And then your clause 3010, you can see final account and so on. Okay. Within the 6 months of practical completion of the works. Okay. So these are the final account start already or final measurement or whatever things. The QS is going to be a very busy person when you receive the CPC. Okay. So what will happen is this: within the 6 months after the CPC, the contractor must submit all their entitlement. I mentioned to you, contractor must send all their entitlement to the QS and the architect for determination of the quantity, the rates, claims, whatever. Okay, so please remember, a lot of times the contractor reserve their rights to claim or the final calculations of their claims around this time. So upon they receive the practical completion certificate, then they will throw you a time bomb here to the architect and the QS. All their figures that previously is not claimed, they put it to the QS and the architect to evaluate now. So they need to do it within 6 months. See here, within 6 months of the CPC. So it's very critical for the contractor to get all their paperwork within 6 months and send it to the QS and architect to do their evaluation. A lot of the items are brand new to the architect and the QS, although there are notifications already. The details, they will come at the last moment. But according to the PAM 2018, they should submit within the time frame. Usually 28 days after the completion, but the contractor sometimes delay until this to prevent a lot of so-called shock. So this is something you need to be careful. Okay. The practical completion trigger the period of final measurement, that is 6 months. Okay. So the QS will be very busy upon the submission of the full documentation. Next will be insurance for the work. I mentioned earlier on the works theft fire, that is the structure during construction time, it is under the contractor's responsibility. After that, after the CPC, employer must provide all this coverage already. Okay, so if you are the QS architect for the project advising the QS advising the architect, please notify the architect, and then the architect will write a letter to the employer. Please provide coverage for the works, for robbery, for fire on the building, the insurance coverage, and so on. Because contractor no more responsible. Contractor responsible is only for the maintenance or the defects part of the work. So the maintenance certificate, maintenance insurance is operational now. The works works insurance is no more already after CPC. The maintenance insurance commences after CPC. Please differentiate between works insurance and maintenance insurance. It is within the same policy. The contractor, when buying the insurance policy, there is a work policy and the maintenance policy within the same insurance policy. The only difference is the CPC will tell you the cutoff period for the works policy and the commencement of the maintenance policy. Okay, so the date of CPC signal the end of the contractor liability for LD. So I hope you understand this interpretation. CPC issued is signal the end of the contractor liability to further LD. See, the keyword is further LD. Without the CPC, the LD to be computed have no ending. Okay, so it is the CPC that tells you when is the last date to compute the LD. I hope you are clear. Without the CPC, you don't know the last date to compute the LD. You know the commencement of the LD. Okay, so commencement of LD is equals to the issue of CNC. Okay, commencement of LD and completion of LD is equals to the issue of CPC. I hope you are clear. When to compute the CPC, LD, you need to look at the CNC issued by the architect. Then you can compute, okay? And then when to calculate the last date for the LD is the date of the CPC. So then you know the maximum already. So from these two dates, you can the maximum amount of LD to be paid by the contractor. If there is no challenge from the contractor. So please remember this important point. Okay, if there is no challenge, this is the maximum already. If there's a challenge, you have to go to calculate your actual loss already. Please remember that an important principle. So this part is only to tell you the starting point and the ending point. Okay, so the commencement of LD is issue of the CNC. If the CNC is issued immediately after the expiry of your construction period, then this will be the maximum. So this one, issue of the CNC at the end of the construction period. Okay, so this is important point. The CNC issued at the end of the construction duration. This one will tell you the commencement of the CNC. But sometimes the CNC is delayed by the architect. Could be issued not at the end of the construction duration. It could be delayed. It means that the LD cannot be calculated yet. It was calculated only from the date of the issue of the CNC. So please remember this important concept. If the CNC is issued at the end of the construction period, that means the next day, it will be the beginning of the computation. And then the end day will be the CPC date. Then you can know the maximum amount. Okay, but please differentiate between the late issue of CNC. Okay, The late issue of CNC means the employer cannot start deducting. Okay, so the employer can only start deducting after the official CNC is issued. Okay, the consultant may delay the issue of CNC at the end of the construction duration by 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month. It can happen in the construction environment. Then it means that the employer will not be able to deduct the LD immediately. They will have to wait until the CNC is officially issued. So please understand this important concept here on the CNC and CPC and when to deduct. I hope we are not confused. Okay. Next one is, yeah, the order to issue VO comes to an end for normal building works. Okay, the order or issue, the so-called the CA power to order comes to an end. This one already studied earlier under your clause 11.3. Only special VOs can be issued. Okay, so normal VO cannot be issued. It doesn't mean that no VO can be issued. Repeat, once the CPC issued, normal VO for the building works no more available for the architects to issue the SAI on the VOs. Only special VOs can be issued to comply with the AAN SP. So the CPC is the day where the contractor wants to challenge the decision of the architect can commence already. So it is the important date. Once it's issued, the contractor got the right to commence the arbitration proceeding on those items that need to be commenced after the CPC. There are another item that can commence on arbitration is immediate arbitration. That one you will already proceed during the progress of the work. So arbitration got two categories. One category you can only commence after you receive your CPC. There's another category that you can commence during the construction phase. I already mentioned to you what other arbitration things that can commence during the construction phase. Number one is the extension of time. Number two is your claims. Okay, issues related to claims and certificate. All this can be done under immediate arbitration. So therefore, it is no surprise why employers are reluctant to take over the works by forcing the contract administrator to delay the issue of CPC, which is not proper. Okay, so these are the practical things that happen at the project site. Contractually, as long as the contractor has remedied the defects, then the architect must work professionally in giving the CPC and not listen to the employer. So if they listen to the employer, the architect is not acting professionally. Okay, so this is a very important. The professionalism of the contract administrator is put to the test. Okay, so this is something that happens in the project where the employer is taking over the professional role of the architect. Okay, so it's something for you to think about in future. Okay, so once already completed, then it is for the employer to take over the completed structure or building, whether it is This is very important. Taking over the completed works by the employer. Okay, so this one I want to bring to you your attention already. Okay, take over the completed by the employer. This contract, if it does not order works to get the certificate of fitness or certificate of completion and compliance. So if this contract, okay, does not include all the works to get the certificate of fitness or certificate of completion. So certificate of CF means the last time is a CF. That is last time. Okay. Now is CCC. Okay. This one is called CCC. And you don't blame the contractor because contractor work is to complete part of it only. Okay. So I did give you an example how unfair the employer, the consultants to the contractor. If you don't give me all the works to get your CCC, then how can the contractor will be hanging at the project site until all the works to get the CCC to be completed? It could be by other contractor and so on. Or maybe the employer didn't even award the contract out yet. So it's very unfair to the contractor under this type of arrangement that the consultant packs into the contract, which to me is next to illegal already or unprofessional practice already. Okay, but it's happening at the current projects that I have been advising. Okay, so this is the reality. It's a very sad situation. The professionalism of the consultants in briefing the employer is missing. Okay, so this is one way to tell you that the playground for the contractor is never fair. Okay, how can the contractor force the contractor to get the CCC? Then only your CPC can only commence. So if the project is not awarded to the contractor to complete everything, it's really unfair. If that is included, then it is something so-called reasonable. Okay, but it doesn't only complete the building only. The roads, the drainage, the sewerage, the electrical connection, water connection is not given to the contractor. Then there's one special clause. I won't give you the CPC until you get all the CCC done. So it's really horrible. Okay, so please remember that when you go out to work, I can assure you this clause is going to be there. I've seen so many employers already forcing the contractor to have all these type of unfair terms and conditions. But too bad, the contractor is desperate for job, sign. But I warn them, this is the implication. Okay, you don't know when is your CPC, so it's up to them. I already put forward my opinion to all the contractors. Okay, yeah. So next we continue. Okay, so shall we take 5 minutes break? Okay. So we are taking 5 minutes break. Oh, sorry. Okay. 5 minutes break. Now 9:55, 10 a.m. So I will continue from 10 a.m. So see you at 10 a.m. So for those who haven't scanned, please can you? So 174, we still got 15 more students. 174 here, see 174 189. We got still more 15. Okay. So for those who are present, haven't scanned, please do so. Welcome back, everyone. So I hope there is no more other clashes. for those who are, maybe have to go for your COVID vaccination, okay? So I confirm now that the test on the 17th is 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. 3 hours. Okay. Confirm 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay. Shall we continue with our lectures? Yeah. So please remember the significance of the CPC. Okay. So this is a very important so-called timeline for the contractor and also for the employer, and also all the consultants need to be aware on the contractual implication. So when the contract administrator certify this CPC item, so there will be a parallel handing over and taking over by the employer. Okay, so then especially over the defects is the contractor's responsibility and maintenance, and also there is the employer side need to take over the other insurance, security, fire, and so on. Okay, so it passed to the contractor to the employer. So this is a very important timeline. So the employer must, before that, usually the consultant need to advise them. So this is part and parcel of the consultancy on what to advise the employer. Before, the word is before the CPC. So you don't advise only after the CPC. It's before the CPC. You have to do a lot of pre-planning, especially on the employer on a certain type of structure. Okay, residential structure not so problematic, but you're talking about commercial structure. For example, hotel, shopping complex. These are important items that the consultant must advise the employer accordingly. Okay, to get the proper people to man the building, security, paperwork, maintenance workers, and so on. All these will be handed over to the employer already. Okay, you cannot do it in the ad hoc operation. You need the important planning on the part of the consultant and the employer. Okay, so first of all is the insurance. I did mention many times already. Had to take over by the employer. Then the security, for the site, the employer need to employ the proper people. Okay, and also the utilities. Contract with the utilities company, because the contractor no more be the user for the utilities, water, electricity, telephone, whatever is no more. It passed to the employer. So the employer people need to continue with the contract or not, or whatever. Okay, so these are the things: insurance, security, utilities, and also the operators, managers, and caretakers for the building or structure to be recruited earlier and not at that day, because it take time to learn. Okay, and also the manuals and all this. On top of that, warranties, instruction must be obtained from the contractor. So all these are important that the consultants must inform the owner and also the contractor to comply. Okay, so It's not just taking over the building, because there are a lot of paperwork, administrative works that need to be done. Records, for example, as built buildings, okay, and also your maintenance menu instruction here must be obtained and take over. Okay, so this is what you need to advise the employer and the contractor to comply upon the CPC or before CPC even. Okay, yeah. So this clause 16.1 is earlier taking over of the project site. Okay, is earlier taking over. If the employer wish to take any part of work earlier. So if the employer willing to take over any partner, that is any time before CPC, it is possible, but certain things need to be followed. Okay, so this part is any time before practical completion is fair that you need to inform the contractor. That means the consent of the contractor you need to obtain as a consultant or the employer. You need to obtain because the project is still under the contractor's contractual license. Okay, so you can do it by as employer or the consultant acting on behalf of the employer. Okay, take possession of the part. So that part will be issued a small completion certificate. So this one I use the term a small CPC. Okay, this is a section of it. Now this one is a CPC. Also, it's also a CPC, but for that small section. Okay. So once the CPC for that small section is issued, it means the concept of practical completion will commence. Okay, in this case, they use the term partial. It's the same case, assuming that that project, that section of it is a completed project. Okay, so what will be the implication? Then the consultants need to value. The QS will have to value the particular project section taken over. Okay, the purpose of this valuation is to identify the retention sum to be released, because at any time when there is a CPC issued, whether it's partial or completed practical completion for that particular area, the retention sum will be reduced, okay, or released. 50% of that particular work have to be released. Okay, so this is important. Then the DLP for that particular section will commence. You're assuming that that small section is another project. Same case, if there is any LD for your overall package, the liquidated damages have to be reduced accordingly. So how does it operate? I give you an example here. Original LD is RM 1000 a day. Okay. So now the original LD is 1000 per day. Partial taking over is 50% of the project value or amount. Okay. So it means that the LD amount will be reduced 50%. the new LD amount for the balance. Balance. The keyword is balance here. The new LD amount. Okay, the keyword here is new LD amount for what? For the balance of the work. Is RM 500 per day. Okay, so this is something for you to think about. I'll just give you an example here on how to operate this partial taking over. Okay, will be reduced accordingly. Say, for example, original LD is 1,000 per day, then partial to, let's say, 50% of the project value amount. So it means that the LD amount will be reduced by half of it. So then you will be the balance of the work you can impose from that time onward. Okay, so it means that the balance of the LD amount is 500 for the balance of the work from the time onward. Okay, for the balance of the work plus the time from the balance work, that is how you compute. The earlier one is going to be still ongoing. Okay, but in this case, because there are two sections, one already taken over, and then the balance one. The balance one will be 500 per day already of the work. Okay, so then the architect within 14 days to release the retention sum upon application by the contractor. So please remember, I don't think it's automatic. So upon taking over, the contractor submit their claim, and then the architect will issue the certificate on the 50% release within 14 days. Okay. And then the money will be paid within the period of honoring upon that certificate issue. So the limit of retention fund shall be reduced. It is no more applicable under your PAM 2018. In PAM 2006, there is such a thing because the calculation of your retention sum is different now. So in your PAM 2018, your retention sum computation is slightly modified. See here? So the retention sum is now 5% throughout already. There is no such thing as 10% of the work done up to a maximum of 5% of the contract sum. No more already. Please remember, your PAM 2018 is different from your PAM 2006 under this retention computation. Repeat, the retention sum for PAM 2018 is 5% flat throughout, and no more 10% of the work done and up to 5% of the contract sum is no more applicable. As usual, the DLP period for that particular part will commence. Okay, so the defects and also how to remediate it will have two comments. For example, your clause 15.1, the first list attached to this partial certificate, and how to handle it is exactly the same as just now I mentioned to you. Okay, then there will be another list under the clause 15.4. That is your last list. That is before the expiry. And then your clause 15.5 is your recurring list for that particular section of the work that you have taken over. Okay, when this is all tidy up, then a CMGD will be issued for that particular part. So please remember that once this happens, that means the contractor will have received two CMGD. One is for the partial taking over before the project complete, and then there is another CMGD for the original contract. Clear? If this one taken over more than once, then you have more than one CMGD, more than one so-called CPC, and so on. Just treat the taking over part as a contract by itself. You are perfectly correct. How to administer it? Just assume that the taking over, whether it is within the contract duration or after the contract duration for some cases, as a contract by itself. How to operate the measurement, your defects, your CMGD, and so on. Just apply the concept as per the original contract. You will be very, very safe. Okay. So once the CMGD issued, then the 50% of the balance of the retention sum must be issued. Only, as I say, that the contractor need to submit their claim for the QS and the architect to prepare the release of the balance of the retention sum. And when to pay, also as usual, within the honoring period under the contract. Okay, so the honoring period of the contract here is when to pay. Okay, so the honoring period, so you got your final account here, 15 months, and then your in honoring period, if non-stated, is 21 days. Okay, so period to final account, if non-stated, will be 15 months from the date of practical completion. But you have another one earlier I mentioned to you, the final account to commence is contractor to submit within 6 months. Okay, so it's something that you need to be careful. When contractor to submit the final account calculation or all their claims is within 6 months of CPC. And then there is a duration on how the architect and the QS to finalize the final account upon the contractor submission. But this is another situation. If non-stated, it will be 15 months from the CPC. So please be careful. There are 2 dates here. One of them is 6 months after the contractor need to submit all their full calculation. And this one, okay, if non-stated, it will be 15 months from the date of practical completion. Please do a timeline. You will see something not so nice here. This is an exercise for you. Try to go back to your clause 30 and then see how to tidy up the account, and here the 15 months. See how are they linked or whether there is any so-called confusion. Please, this is an exercise for you to look into. Okay. So under your clause 16.2, the contractor, once you get your CPC, then the employer will enter and occupy the works or part of the work. So now in this case, without consent, that means you don't need the contractor's consent for taking part of the work. So if this happens, the employer can ask the architect to say, to demarcate which part of the work to be taken over without the consent of the contractor. Why? Because the project is already delayed. Okay, and the CNC already issued. When the project is delayed and CNC issued, that means the original contractual duration or the extended duration expire. Okay, so this is how, without consent, taking over a part of the site or the project, because the project is already delayed by the contractor and the CNC already issued. So as usual, it should be fair to the contractor. The contractor works should not have unreasonable disturbance for the remaining part. Okay, so if that's the case, that means the provisions of 16.1a to f applicable. So you look at your clause 16.1 until f. So as usual, as what we have discussed, 16.1 a to f. Okay, So this is thing 1A to F. Possession occupy part of the work. You call it partial taking over under your 16 clause 1, A to F. So this is what we have discussed already just now. 14 days to issue the so-called partial practical completion. And then the liquidated to be adjusted. Okay. And then the so-called retention sum to be released and so on. So this one is already discussed here. Okay. Above. So the contractor shall, upon written instruction from the architect, remove the facilities and everything from that occupied part. It's fair because the contractor is already delayed, and then there are a lot of other things on the area that will be taken over. So the architect got the right to instruct the contractor under clause 16.3. Issue the AI for the contractor to clean up the area, plant whatever, but at the end of the day, they won't disturb the contractor to finish the balance of the work. Then this taking over or partial taking over under the project delay is completed. So now we go into the NSCs and the completion. So DSCs is contractors so-called territory. Now we're talking about NSCs. NSCs is something allowing the employer or the architect to invite them to participate and force it to the main contractor to accept it. This is the real principle behind it. Force it to the contractor to take over the nominated subcontractor. Okay, so this principle is explained under this case law, how the NSCs can come in. So this case law will give you a very important insight on how the employer and the consultant can force the contractor to accept the nominated subcontractor, because this scheme is an ingenious way for the employer to select the party they're going to work for certain specialized area. So NSCs, please remember, is more towards the specialist work. The nominated subcontractor is usually for the specialist work. So the whole purpose is an ingenious method. They call it ingenious method. To me, it's an unfair method. Okay, so it is for the employer to choose which one to work on the prime sum work, like electrical, mechanical works, or aircon, or something that is very, very specialized. Okay, so this is one of the main purpose of the NSC's system. Okay, yeah. So another one is to have the possibility of direct payment. Okay, so all the terms and conditions that is agreed by the employer with the NSCs is forced upon the main contractor. So this is how the NSC system works. Not only in UK, in Malaysia is exactly the same. Okay, yeah. So please remember, the responsibility is forced upon the main contractor to accept. But there is a saving clause. Okay, if the right to object, the right is very, very limited. So what are the rights to object? Is usually very, very limited. For example, technically not sound. If the NSC is technically not sound is one of them, or number 2, weak in financial strength. Okay, and number 3, where the main contractor have bad working relationship previously. These are the usual ground I believe that the main contractor can raise to reject the nominated subcontractor. Apart from these 3, is quite difficult already. Okay, so please be careful. As a contractor, these are your limited ground to object. But once you didn't object, at the end of the day, you cannot blame the employer for engaging the NSCs that cannot perform well. The problems, the headache belongs to the contractor and no more to the employer or to the consultants. The contractor cannot raise this ground to say that my project is delayed and everything because you force me to take in the stupid NSCs, non-skillful NSCs and so on. No more ground already. Please remember that. Once the NSCs is signed, it is between the main contractor and the NSCs. The employer, the consultant already washed their hand clean. Please remember that. It's a very unfair concept or unfair principle forced upon the main contractor. We so-called the NSC system. If I got the power, I will delete all the NSC system from the contract. Let the main contractor choose their domestic subcontractor. Any problem, whatever thing is the main contractor's headache. Why go and mess around with the main contractor's responsibility and liability? It's just too bad. Our system is adopting the UK, and then most of our consultants and all these things adopt them blindly. It is a very sad situation. Okay, in UK, already they are cutting off all the NSAs from their contract document already because they know it is a very unfair contract arrangement. Are you clear now? So please be careful. No? This is what you need to take back on the implication of the NSAs on the Malaysian contract system. Okay. For those you want to do a research on this one, you can always go into it. So it is something very interesting. But for those contractually sound, then you can take this for your FYP. If not, don't go in. You must be contractually sound. Okay. Yep. Then we continue now. Okay. So you can see why the clause 27 is the longest and the most complicated under your main contract. All this is because that the document is drafted in such a way that how to incorporate somebody that is outside the system into the main contract system. So this is forcing the main contract to accept the NSAs, the responsibility, the liability after the selection. That's why you can see clause 27 is the longest and the most complicated provisions in the contract. Okay, so you have to look into the legal and the practical problem. So they have to be very careful how to protect the employer. So the NSAs is pre-selected by the architect or the employer to do the work. And forced to have a direct contract between the NSAs and the main contractor. Okay, so this one, the nomination is that it gives the architect control or respect of the person on the side as a nominated subcontractor, which is under the main contractor's control. Can you see how unfair the system can be? Nominate them, want to control them, even though it is under the main contractor's control. The consultants would like to get involved. Okay. So it is the architect reserve the right to select and pack it to the main contractor. So this is the very unfair system. Okay, it is not for the main contractor to select, it's for the employer and the architect to select, and then okay, you got a chance to object, which is on very limited ground. Once the objections periods are over, you are forced to take in that nominated subcontractor. And any problem with the non-subcontractor, contractor, this is your problem and not my problem anymore. Okay, yeah. So generally, for the system to work fairly, okay, the commencement of work is stated in the time award of the subcontractor. For the NSCs, now there is a commencement date and the completion date for the NSCs. Okay, but then the NSCs, once they get into the equation, also suffers a lot. So can you imagine NSA system under this method? Selection is by the employer and the architect, and then packed to the main contractor. Once the NSA is already selected and packed to the main contractor, the NSA's nightmare commence. I repeat, once they are successfully packed to the main contractor, the NSA's nightmare commence. Why? I am telling you now why the NSA's nightmare commence. Even though there is a commencement date of the NSAs and everything in the subcontract when they negotiate with the employer. But then, once they pack to the main contractor, the main contractor control the starting date. So can you imagine how pitiful the NS is? You plan your work with the date that is discussed with the employer and the consultants. Once you pack to the main contractor will decide when you can start work and so on. So can you imagine that? The NSA is going to be in a very bad situation because their planning will be very, very upset depending on the main contractor progress of the main work. Okay? Yeah. He is expected, the NSA is expected according to the main contractor's program. If main contractors delay, the NSAs must follow the delayed program and so on. Okay? So they are allowed, that means the main contractor is allowed to vary the program of the NSAs whatever, and the NSAs have no or little contractual redress. So can you imagine? This is a nightmare for the NSAs. Upon contract with the main contractor, the employer washes the hand, consultant washes the hand, main contractor takes over the responsibility of the NSAs. But then the NSAs plan all their work, could be in a mess. Why? They must follow the main contractor's program. Okay? And the program of the main contractor can change. But the NSAs must accommodate all the main contractor's program change. So it is going to be a very sad situation for the NSAs. Okay? So this is the reason why I keep on repeating. NSAs is at the mercy of the main contractor in terms of the program of the work and how to strategize their work. Okay? So do you have your period of completion? Let's say it's 1 month, 1 year, or 6 months. No problem. But at another day, your starting and the ending time, the contractor controls you. So this one will be a terrible impact over the NSA's so-called program. Okay, so the situation faced by the subcontractors to perform their work to the main contractor schedule is a very terrible risk. Okay, it's one of the considerable risks to them. Why? Because the main contractor can amend, extend everything, their project work, and could affect the NSAs accordingly. Okay, and yet there may be no redress available to the subcontractor who suffer loss after this exercise. So do you think this is very terrible? This is supported by this case law, that why the NSAs have no redress against the main contractor's main program or whatever. So repeat, NSAs is always at the mercy of the main contractors in terms of the subcontract work. So with that, now we come and end to your topic 1.14. Okay, so we are going to commence another new area, that is 1.106. Just now is 1.5, and now 1.6 are defects. Okay. So you take a few minutes break, then I commence on the defects and rectification. So 10:41. You take 5 minutes break. Okay. So we will continue at 10:41. I hope you are all informed. That is 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Okay, for the test on the Saturday, 17 July. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. So now we are at section 1.16, that is defects and rectifications. So understand the concept of defects, which I have already covered a lot on your clause 15 earlier. Okay, so what does defects liability mean? Okay, so it is the post-completion stage. So defects liability occurs for construction projects where there is a defects liability duration. So it is where the contractor and the NSCs have to attend to complete any minor outstanding work identified by the architect. So these outstanding are by the architect, there are many type of leases. Okay, so many types of the DLP list. DL list. There are many types of DL lists. For example, we have the initial. To be attached with the CPC. Okay, and then you have the final list to be completed and for the CMGD to be issued. Okay, and then you have another list. Okay, so you have list number 1, list number 2, the final first and final, then is the recurring list. During the defects liability period. So this is what you need to know. Okay, so then the contractor, the NSCs, not only the contractors, all those under the contractor's control must rectify the defects. If not, the implication will be the employer can ask other parties and all the costs incurred will be passed to the main contractor. And the main contractor will charge it to the NSCs or the DSCs. That is private arrangement between them already. As a consultant and employer, you only deal with the main contractor. Okay? Yeah. So that they have to start preparing the handover document. This is one of them. That is your as-built, operation manuals, warranties, guarantees, and so on. So plus a lot more. Okay, so these are the things that the consultants must ask the contractor to prepare in advance, not on the last day only start collecting. Okay, so it should be prepared in advance. A lot of the documents for those that can be prepared. For those that cannot be prepared in advance, then within the defects liability period, they must complete and pass it to the consultants, and the consultant will pass it and compile it nicely and pass it to the owner. So I have to sort out the account. That is, within 6 months, the contractor must come up with their final claim. If the contractor didn't submit all their claims within that 6 months, any additional claim to be added after the expiry of the 6 months of the CPC. I have seen cases that the consultants use this ground to reject the contractor's addition. Clear? Contractually, 6 months. Okay, so the consultant submit at, let's say, month 7 after the CPC. So the consultants wrote back to the contractor, your rights to be added, additional claim is rejected. Why? Because the duration for submission of the final account already exceeded. So please be careful in future if you are working for the contractor. Make sure that you submit everything that you entitled for the payment or whatever things for the architect and QS to evaluate is within 6 months of the CPC. Okay, so this is the contractual so-called time bar. But if you think that you got a case, then you bring it out outside the contractual time bar. You go on to the common law claim already. So I always repeat, contractual claim is easier to process and everything, faster. But then if your right extinguished under the contractual process, you can jump into the common law process. But that one will take time and a lot of compilation and lawyers will be involved already. Okay? Yeah. If there's any dispute, so you can always go for the arbitration. No more mediation, I believe. No point already. Already completed. Why go and go for mediation again? Okay. If this thing cannot be resolved, the dispute over the computation, whatever things, you can always go for mediation and so on. But most the preferred route after this stage will be arbitration. So the completion and handing over is very important for every parties to comply and then to successfully discharge their obligation by performance. Okay, this is a discharge of the obligation by performance. This is the contractual term. Okay, next we go on to the type of defects. So I mentioned earlier, there are a few types of defect. One of them is the patent defects. One of them is the latent defects. Another one is the critical defects. Okay, patent, latent, critical defects. And then there's one category of defect is not the responsibility of the contractor. So these are the clause in relation to the contractor's responsibility and liability. So under the 15.3, clause 15.3, already they are linked to the clause 15.1. That is the initial lease. If you didn't rectify the initial lease, what will happen? Okay, so the employer got these 3 rights. Usually, the employer will choose one. Okay, more often than not, I find that this is the more powerful one. The contractor will have to rectify the work. If not, then the employer will engage other party and then charge to you. Okay, I doubt very seldom they will ask 15.3c to leave the work and then ask the contractor don't have to do the repair. Okay, so these are the usual rights that the employer has against the contractor. So always remember 15.4 is the last lease. This is the last lease. 15.1 is the first lease. Here, this is the first lease. Okay, this one is the first lease. This one is the last lease, and then this one is the recurring lease. Okay, this one is the last lease. This is your recurring lease. Within the DLP. Okay, so this is what you need to understand. So now understand the term defects. It means so this is what is classified as defects: imperfection, shrinkage, and other fault. Okay, so two categories. One of the category is patent and latent defects. Okay, patent and latent. Patent defects is a major defect. You will never get your CPC. If the architect for the PEM 2018 identifier is a patent defect, you will never get your CPC. So these are the defects that the consultant will bring it to the attention of the contractor. There are patent defects, and then there's the latent defects. Is your number 2. Latent defects, you cannot see it now. It will be only raise it up after the project completed. I hope you understand patent defects and latent defects. So these are two categories. There's another one is a recurring defects. Recurring defects, there are two categories again. One of them is critical and then the other one is non-critical. Okay. So what are the defects under the contractor's responsibility or the NSC's and the main contractor's responsibility? Okay. So it will always be a problem between the parties on whether it is the contractor's problem or not. So you need to understand which categories contractor is responsible, which category the defects contractor is not responsible, because there are a lot of situations which is happening in the industry. The contractor is forced to repair and so-called maintain the things during the defects liability period. I can give you one very terrible example under this category. Okay, it is a housing project, and that housing project where the developer already passed the completed building with the CCC and CFR or CF, so that they can occupy. Okay, so after occupying for certain months, one of the house owner went overseas. Okay, and then the content of the fridge, the content of the fridge for that particular owner is totally damaged. Due to what reason? The electricity supply to the house is cut off while the owner is overseas. Then the owner brought this item, saying that the contractor is responsible to replace the fridge that is having so smelly, plus the content of the fridge. So please remember, do you think the contractor is responsible for such situation where the cause of these defects, the so-called defects to the content of the fridge, and also the fridge becomes non-usable because of the smell, and pass it to the contractor? But before that, they pass it to the employer. Okay, so they claim from the employer that your system is defective. So the employer is also a very unfair category, as I can see from here. Call the contractor in and give this list to the contractor, forcing the contractor to take responsibility for the damage to the fridge and the content inside the fridge. So you can see all sorts of very interesting situations when you go out to work. Okay, basically, if you were to sit back and think, is it the defects that is contractors responsible? To me, this one is outside the contractor's territory. But in the commercial world, this is happening. The employer or the architect force it to the contractor. And more often than not, I pity the contractor. They have to accept it because of the commercial decision they have to make. Because if they were to challenge the consultants and the employer, maybe next few months, no job from this employer or recommendation by the consultants for other job. So I hope you understand the reality in the construction world. Okay, contractually, a lot of times the contractor are right, but they are forced to do whatever things at the whims and fancies of the employer and the consultant. Okay, so please remember, this is a real example that you're going to face in your working life on whether the defects or problems belongs to the contractor or not. Okay, so with that, I stop here for the moment. We continue next week. Should be tidying up everything nicely before the next lecturer takes over on your week 7. Okay. Okay, now 178, 179. So 10 of the students are absent. So if you don't have any valid reasons, I can't help. I'm exporting out already. Okay. Okay. So as usual, I try to download here just it's okay. I do some cleaning. Okay. So, okay. Stop the recording.